right, welcome to the show, Jim Nusbaum. It's great to have you here. I'm delighted to get you on here. You're actually our first bagel shop as well, so
all right, there you go.
Well. Yeah, it's awesome. I'm excited.
Lead off. I love it.
I'm very excited to talk about bagels. Tell me, do you want to give us a bit of an introduction into yourself? You know, how you got to where you are today and what you're up to, and we'll kick off from there.
Sure. Try to keep it moderately short about me, but I grew up in Toledo, Ohio, and I grew up as a Barry Bagels fan. And my first job ever as a 15-year-old was actually at Barry Bagels as a garbage taker-outer and onion cutter. And I ended up going to law school. I'm a recovering lawyer and worked in the corporate sector for quite a while, moved into the private sector representing general counsel for a business, helping other businesses. Barry Bagels at that time was 5 sort of family-owned shops. They had wanted to grow, and I knew the family well, and so we formed a holdings company with the goal of growing franchising. And now I'm the CEO of Barry Bagels Franchise Holdings, which is the franchising arm of our brand. And we have 16 locations, 5 under construction, and a total of 44 locations, either open or under development. Really in the Midwest, Ohio, Michigan, opening soon in Indiana, and looking for spots in Kentucky.
That's awesome. And when I think about bagels, like I think like, you know, very like New York kind of thing, you know.
Sure.
So like you're talking about Midwest here and bringing them to Kentucky. Like it sounds like there's an enormous appetite for them, given how many stores you
I think they're pretty, you know, people like them. They're fairly common. I think they've sort of crossed over from a niche, you know, sort of ethnic sort of food to kind of more common or more universal. But yes, you know, the connotation is New York or East Coast. And, you know, we find that, you know, we sort of cross all borders with our bagels, and so far so good with that.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's amazing to hear that you're like scaling it so quickly and scaling it with like franchises as well. And given that you knew the family, I'm always curious, how do you think about like scaling the culture that you learned from the family into across so many state borders? Like it must be a certain
challenge. It's always a challenge, you know, because our family, our culture is a really big part of what we are. The Greenblatt family, you know, has and continues to sort of lead with integrity and really valuing employees and customers. We have people who've worked with us 20, 30, 40 years. Awesome. Our brand started in 1972. So it's translating that culture. You know, we try to emphasize it. We try to bring in franchisees, you know, spend a lot of time with them. A lot of them are familiar with our brand, you know, which is sort of what piqued their interest to begin with. But it's always, you know, I think our franchisees do a great job of kind of representing what we believe we're about. But it's really, you know, we want to provide a superior experience for everyone in our restaurant. And that includes a dining experience, that includes an employment experience. We want our vendors to feel valued. So, you know, I think that both at a corporate level and at the franchise level, it's something that we really emphasize. And I think in a humble way, we do well. And I think our franchisees do well also.
Well, I mean, humble. I mean, you've got so many locations and, you know, like proudly humble is how I would phrase it almost.
Proudly humble. Always humble, but proud of the brand.
Exactly. And that's awesome. And I one of the things I definitely hear from people all the time, or one of my observations rather, is that like, I think what separates, you know, the sub 20 locations from kind of everybody else is the food is obviously a huge component of it, because people obviously want a certain type of food. But I think what kind of elevates the brand into like that kind of next level of like stratospheric kind of growth, that the position that you're finding yourself in now is like the culture of like the guest experience and the employee experience in particular, because they're so like enmeshed in some sort of like one holy grail of a human experience, you know? And I think about that a lot, like, especially, and I thought you were going to say something there where I was like, in the sense, I think about it a lot because the industry's changed so much. And like, when I think about, say, pre and post COVID, like I had somebody on recently, the CEO of East Coast Subs on actually, and he was saying like their business has kind of turned upside down since COVID, like digital to in-store, and how they're like, how do we capture like the in-store experience or improve it so much that when somebody comes that it's like better than what you get like from DoorDash or whichever. So I'm always curious about that. Like, I mean, like, how do you think about like, say, the evolution of the change of the business? And then like, how do you think about it like now versus the way it was before? Because you've been involved for such a long time.
Sure. So a couple of things, and I'm going to answer or speak to something you said, and then we'll get to how things have changed. But I do think one sort of evolution is, it used to be, I guess the customer's always right, kind of whatever you have to do to please the customer, that sort of thing. And I certainly believe that customer satisfaction is an incredibly important element of what we do. I also, though, would say that, especially with a tightening labor market, it's important for several reasons to make sure your employees are having a good experience. Number one, it's a tight labor market, so you want your employees to enjoy or, feel valued. But I would also suggest that I don't believe employees can provide a great customer experience if they're not feeling valued themselves. And, they can't fake it. And so, if they're being treated poorly by management or they're, miserable, they can't turn around and provide that customer with a good experience. And you have to be authentic with your employees. And now I also think you have to not just, maybe several years ago, somebody might just say, well, my employee knows I value them, I pay them. But now I think you have to, leadership has to communicate. Like, you're doing a great job. We really appreciate you. People need to and should and reasonably should expect to hear positive feedback from management. And I think, that's how you retain and reward, great employees. Because otherwise, what you're going to get, in my opinion, is all you'll get is compliance and not excellence. If you treat people poorly, they'll work hard enough not to get fired. But if you treat them well, then that's when you start getting that superior performance, which then will translate into the customer experience. So I think that's an area of emphasis, especially today, that we try to sort of personify or live by, and in all of our stores. But in terms of what's changed, what you see is, certainly a few things. One, rise of digital. I would say rise of third-party delivery. DoorDash, Uber Eats, Grubhub are just continuing to embed in the restaurant experience. And I think where it's going to manifest, or where it's starting to manifest, is smaller footprints. You would need a 60, 70, 80 seat store. Now you're seeing 10, 20, 30 seat stores, or now you're seeing even drive-through only stores or walk-up stores, just sort of the modular kind of builds. So I think that's, in terms of the physical characteristics of what a store looks like. I think you're going to start seeing that. You're starting to see that smaller footprint, really emphasizing to-go and third-party delivery channels, with less seating and those kind of things.
You mentioned just there, like tightening labor market is kind of a forcing function to really understand like retention, for example. And when I think about a tightening labor market, obviously like certain metro areas are like very affected, then suburban areas have their own sort of like issues with like the top of the labor market as well. And I'm curious, like, just like your sort of perception on the labor market today then, because we see that, say, like employment and hospitality is back to where it was in pre-2020. And so that sort of rush or glut to like hire people post-COVID is kind of like, I don't say over, but it's like
Yeah,
where we were. So I'm curious your take on like, the job market as a whole.
sure. I think it's better than it was 9 months ago.
Yeah.
Certainly. I do think though that, or a year ago, I do think though that to retain good employees, you have to both reward them financially, provide a good environment for them while they're at your place, provide upward sort of mobility opportunities for them, to move. But I also think flexibility, right? And so, what I think is that our employees today generally want the ability to something as simple as trading shifts, or as long as they're qualified for whatever, and that sort of thing. And meaning that if something comes up, they don't want to have to choose between their family or a life cycle event and working behind the counter. They want the ability and a supportive management, to be able to sort of move things around if they can. And so that's not to say you can't no call, no show, but they want to see, that type of environment is very alluring or appealing to potential employees. Give us notice. We try to be flexible. We're gonna, give you a meal while you're here, or, we're gonna send you home with bagels, or whatever the case may be. I think that that's what people are looking for. I do think the labor market's better, though, clearly better than it was 9 months ago. But I still think there's competition for really good employees, and I assume there always will be.
It's interesting because you've kind of hit the nail on the head on A, what I hear, and B, what I see in my actual job, which is like when I started, landed like 2022, like we're coming just out of, say, the real COVID experience of like a year of lockdowns and recoveries in 2021. And when I joined, it was very much like top of funnel, top of funnel, top of funnel. And that led to like ghosting, and just an enormous investment in top of funnel to get stores up and running. Investment was in restaurants and, hospitality, and people were opening new stores and there wasn't enough staff. One of the things I definitely see a swing of that pendulum is into like, I need to find quality. And I need to find quality people I can trust. And there is that sort of like science for like that nature versus nurture kind of thing, which is like, I hear a lot about like, finding the responsible sort of manager kind of person is a very difficult undertaking from like a sort of cold strategy to hire that person, versus what I hear a lot of people say now is like designing programs, benefits, and reinstituting a better type of culture to groom existing staff for sort of positions of leadership as they want to progress their career, almost like designing career paths for people, which kind of didn't really exist before. It kind of existed in some places, but not as an emphasis before COVID. But now it's obviously an actualization that this actually needs to happen across the board.
I think it's certainly more intentional, right? I mean, I think
intentional is the word. Yes.
Yeah, I think it used to be, if there's an opening, we'll figure out who we're going to promote, and sort of look at our bench and see that sort of thing. Yep. I think now you have to show people, and you should, and it's a reasonable expectation for employees, like, here's your path, or here's a path, or here's a possible path, and then you have to live with it. And then you have to do it as an employer. You can't just say it and not do it. Then you lose credibility. But yes, I think that there's an intentional nature now that we're just not going to wait till there's a vacancy and figure it out. And, people want to know, in 2 years, I'm going to be this, and in 3 years, I'm going to be this, and, that sort of thing. And I do think, and I think that's good. By the way, I also think that's good for management, to be put in that position, to be thoughtful and, it's not reactive. So I think, again, it's a reasonable expectation. I think it's also something that is attractive to both potential and current employees. Remember, your current employees, you can't like go to sleep and just think that you're happy. You're always sort of still recruiting your own people. So, I mean, and I think it's a mistake to just focus on filling, sort of your staff. You really have to engage with your current staff. And I think, that's something that we try to do, make sure that, enrichment, do fun things, but also sort of reward them, as they perform and progress. And I mean, I think that sometimes you can forget about your current staff a little bit in business. We try to make it a point of emphasis not to do that.
Yeah, I find it very, like, I mean, that's the intention, and I don't even know if intentionality is a word. Like
it is now.
I guess we're here. I guess we're here over saying it.
It's going to go on the internet, so we'll get it adapted.
But the phrase, yeah. Now it's I think they call that a neologism. But I think the word intention, I think it's probably the most succinct way I've heard it kind of articulated since I've kind of started doing this. It's like, treating your employees with intention as before, kind of, like you said, like if there's an opening, we'll see who's there. And I think that kind of, like, I mean, it's obviously amazing. And I think the market is dictating that sort of behavior as well. Like, obviously, if it's so expensive to go and find people and hire them and bring them in and then get them ready for your business versus like you've got people here. But it sounds to me like you've already got a system down very well, because I mean, like, and it stems from the culture. I mean, you were saying to me at the very beginning of the call that you people that have been with you 20, 30, 40 years, like, as in they're not sticking around presumably just because of the paycheck. Do you know what I mean? Like,
well, sure, and I think that's true, but you also have to recognize that what is valuable to a 45-year-old may not be the same value to a 25-year-old, right?
Yeah.
And so you also have to be aware of, I'll call it, disparities in your workforce, so, and just, you can't, it's not one size fits all.
Yeah.
And so you just have to be in tune with that, especially, the more people you have working with you, the greater sort of the spectrum of your workforce in terms of age, experience, and all of those things. And you want to provide value to, all of them. I mean, if I, got everyone, if I got a 50-year-old a Spotify gift card, and maybe they'd like it, maybe they wouldn't, but it might, really be valuable to somebody a little younger or whatever, so you just have to be thoughtful in terms of how again, it's not one size fits all. I do think there's an intentional nature to it today that didn't exist. Just be thoughtful.
And I guess, like, for your peers who are listening to this, okay?
Yeah.
And you're like, I want you to get on your soapbox now. I want you to get up.
Well, as
a former lawyer, I'm sure you're well able to get up on the soapbox. But what advice would you give to somebody? And I'm going to leave it as open-ended as that.
Relative to a workforce, or
if you're in hospitality?
Yeah, I think, listen, I'm very wary of, I certainly don't have all the answers, and I'm very wary of giving a lot of advice. I think I would just say the only thing I would say is don't presume that people know you appreciate them. I think what happens is you probably really do appreciate someone, and you might believe they know they're appreciated, but believe it or not, there might be a disconnect, and so where they don't actually feel that way. So again, I'm very I'm slow to give advice because there's so many talented people out there, but I would just say don't presume anyone knows, good or bad, by the way, how you really feel. I think direct communication, both in terms of positive feedback and coaching. I wouldn't presume anyone knows how you really feel. I think direct communication is real important. But again, I'm always learning myself. So,
but it seems to me that you've learned a lot, and I mean, obviously, and the empathy, because you're going like that angle of like understanding the person and don't presume to know what's going on in their head. Goes back to what you're talking about, which was one of the key things you said, which was like communication from the get-go, which is like, how do you like communicate with staff? Like, how do you think about, like, how do you learn about like what's kind of going on in their life on a kind of like less shallow kind of way? You know what I mean? And presuming that just because they're showing up doesn't mean that they're the happiest person today, or that something happened in their life, like over like the period between the last time you saw them and today, and really figuring out how to motivate them. I think that's like, honestly, like very inspiring kind of.
I appreciate that.
Frankly.
No, I appreciate it. And, listen, the lowest form of it is somebody says, well, they know I appreciate them. I pay them every 2 weeks. And, that, to me, that ship has sailed. Like and for good reason. And thankfully, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So,
too competitive. It's too competitive now.
Yeah. Well, and it's, to me, I just think that's not a great way to run things. So, but I do think, again, not presuming that, walking around saying, man, so-and-so does a great job. They're awesome. They come in every day. You're sort of telling yourself this. Well, go tell them.
Yeah.
Go tell them, say, hey, I appreciate you. You're doing great. Thank you. I value what you do for us. You're really a, great brand ambassador. It doesn't take a lot, but it means a lot. So to me, again, I'm cautious to give advice, but I think that's a reasonable, I'll sort of leave it there. I'm going to stop I think that's a reasonable piece of,
I think that's a great piece of advice. I think that's great advice, actually. I think, the more cognizant we are of ourselves and the self-awareness that we have around the rest of the staff, and knowing that like we don't know things, and being able to check in and communicate with them on like a personal level, I think is actually extraordinarily important. And I mean, it sounds to me like you're living and breathing it. I can kind of feel it emanating from the screen to me here. So
we try. We try. And I mean, it's not, if you mean it, it's not hard to do.
Yeah.
If you're trying to fake it, then it gets a little tougher, but we mean it. So it's not hard.
Well, I'm going to have to come to Ohio.
You're welcome. Listen, you give me, I would say this, you give me 1 day lead time. Don't eat or eat very little the day before. We can give you like a little bit around the world tour here in Ohio, and you won't leave hungry, I promise.
Well, I'm excited for that for sure. And I have a perfect excuse as well, because my CEO is from there. So I'm like, I guess family trip.
There you go. I think you have to, right, exactly. You're going to do some background.